The rain fell soft and gray over the city of New Geneva, washing the tall buildings and empty streets in the early morning light. And in a small veterans' hospital on the edge of the old district, a man named Marcus Cole woke up the same way he had woken up for the past 10 years. Alone and forgotten by a world that had moved on without him, he was 67 years old now. His hair white and thin, his face carved with deep lines that told stories nobody wanted to hear anymore. And his body carried scars that doctors said should have killed him 3 times over. But Marcus Cole was stubborn in ways that made even death think twice. The hospital room was small but clean, with a window that looked out over the city skyline and a small shelf where Marcus kept his few possessions. A faded photograph of his old squad, a medal he never wore, and a single dried flower from a planet most humans had never heard of. He pushed himself out of bed with a grunt, his joints protesting the movement the way they always did. And he shuffled to the window to look out at the world below, where people hurried to their jobs and their lives, never once looking up at the old soldier, watching them from above. 30 years, he thought to himself. 30 years since the war ended and the galaxy changed forever. The HFY War had been the first real conflict between humanity and an alien species. A brutal and bloody affair that had lasted for 5 years and claimed millions of lives on both sides. And Marcus had been right in the middle of it. A sergeant in the United Terran Marine Corps, leading men into battles that history books would later describe in clean and simple terms that missed all the horror and the fear and the desperate hope that kept soldiers fighting when everything seemed lost. He remembered the way the HFY looked when he first saw them. Tall insectoid creatures with hard chitin shells and multiple limbs and compound eyes that seemed to see everything at once. And he remembered thinking that these beings were so different from humans that peace would never be possible, but he had been wrong about that. Or at least partly wrong. The war ended not with victory or defeat, but with something stranger. An armistice that left both sides exhausted and weary, and in the 30 years since, humanity and the HFY had maintained a cold and distant peace, trading occasionally, talking rarely, and watching each other across the vast darkness of space with the memory of all that blood still fresh in their minds. Marcus turned away from the window and began his morning routine. The slow and careful movements of a man whose body had been broken and rebuilt too many times. And he thought about the day ahead, which would be much like every other day. Breakfast in the common room, a walk in the rooftop garden he had helped build, and then long hours of sitting and remembering things he wished he could forget. The nurses at the hospital were kind to him, calling him by his first name and listening to his stories even when they had heard them before. And Marcus was grateful for their patience, because he knew that old soldiers could be difficult company, stuck in the past and unable to let go of memories that shaped everything they were. But there was one story Marcus never told anyone, one night that he kept locked away in the deepest part of his mind. And sometimes late at night, when sleep would not come, he would take out that memory and look at it, the way a man might look at a precious and dangerous thing. The night on Tesseract 7, the burning moon, the collapsing bunker, and the alien he had saved when every rule and every order told him to let her die. He did not know why he had done it. Not really, and in all the years since that night, he had never found an answer that satisfied him. But he knew that something in that moment had changed him forever, had made him into a different kind of man than he had been before. The alien had been wounded and dying, pinned under debris in a command bunker that his squad had been sent to clear. And when Marcus found her, she had looked at him with those strange compound eyes, and he had seen something there that he recognized. Not hate or fear, but a fierce and desperate will to live that transcended species and language and all the differences between them. He had saved her, carrying her through fire and chaos while his brothers died around him. And when the HFY found them, they had taken her with a gentleness that surprised him. And one of them had spoken words in broken human language that Marcus had never forgotten. "You will be remembered." But he was not remembered. Not by anyone who mattered, because his commanders had buried the report and classified the mission and quietly discharged him from the service. And Marcus had spent the next 30 years trying to forget that night while knowing that he never would. He made his way to the common room for breakfast, nodding to the other veterans who sat at the long tables. Men and women who had fought in different wars and carried different scars, but who all shared the same look in their eyes. The look of people who had seen too much and come home to find that home had changed while they were away. Television on the wall was showing the morning news, and Marcus paid it little attention as he ate his simple meal of eggs and toast, thinking about the garden on the roof and the tomatoes that would need watering today. But then a word caught his ear, a name that made his hand freeze halfway to his mouth. And he looked up at the screen with a sudden sharp attention that surprised even himself. Earth News. Anchor was speaking in the excited tones that reporters use when something truly important has happened. And behind her was an image that Marcus had not seen in 30 years. The distinctive shape of a HFY diplomatic vessel. All curves and organic lines that looked more grown than built a HFY ship had entered Earth orbit, the first in 3 decades. And it was not just any ship, but the royal flagship of the Dominion itself. The Queen was coming to Earth. Marcus felt his heart begin to pound in his chest, a feeling he had not experienced since his days in combat. And he stared at the screen as the anchor continued to speak about the historic nature of this visit and the questions it raised about the future of human-alien relations. But Marcus was not thinking about politics or diplomacy or the future of 2 species. He was thinking about a burning moon and a dying alien, and a choice he had made 30 years ago that had cost him everything and given him something he could not name. The Queen, he thought. The Queen herself was coming to Earth, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice whispered a question he was afraid to answer. Could it be her? Could the alien he saved all those years ago have been the Queen of the HFY Dominion? He told himself it was impossible. Told himself that the galaxy was vast and full of aliens, and that the odds of such a thing were too small to consider. But his hands were shaking, and his heart would not slow down. And Marcus Cole sat alone at the breakfast table while the world buzzed with excitement around him. Something was coming. He could feel it in his old bones, something that would change everything. He thought he knew about that night and about himself, and about the strange and wonderful universe that humans had stumbled into when they first reached for the stars, and for the first time in many years. Marcus Cole felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. He felt hope. 30 years earlier, the moon called Tesseract 7 was burning. Marcus Cole was 37 years old then. His body strong and quick, his mind sharp from years of combat training. And he led a squad of 12 Marines through the twisted tunnels of a HFY command complex while plasma fire lit up the darkness around them. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning metal, and every breath felt like swallowing fire. But Marcus pushed forward because that was what Marines did. They pushed forward until the mission was complete or until they could not push anymore. His Bosch squad had been tasked with clearing the tunnels and destroying any enemy command infrastructure they found. A simple mission on paper, but nothing was ever simple in war. And Marcus had learned long ago that the plans made by officers in safe rooms rarely survived contact with the chaos of actual combat. Private Chun was on his left, a rifle up and ready, and Corporal Davis was on his right, his face covered in soot and blood from a wound he refused to let anyone treat. And behind them came the rest of the squad, good soldiers all, men and women who trusted Marcus with their lives. They had already lost 2 people that night, Williams and Ortega, both killed by a HFY ambush in the outer tunnels. And Marcus carried the weight of their deaths in his chest like a stone that would never go away. The tunnels were strange and alien, carved from the rock in patterns that made no sense to human eyes. All curves and spirals that seemed to follow some logic that humans could not understand. And the walls were marked with symbols that glowed faintly in colors Marcus had no names for. They found the command center at the end of the deepest tunnel, a large chamber filled with broken equipment and dead bodies. And Marcus held up his fist to signal his squad to stop while he scanned the room for threats. The HFY dead were everywhere. Their chitin shells cracked and burned, their limbs twisted in the positions of their final moments. And Marcus felt nothing but a cold and distant sadness for creatures who had probably been as scared as he was when they died. But then he saw something that made him freeze in place in the center of the room. Pinned under a collapsed support beam was a HFY unlike any he had seen before, larger than the others, with chitin that shimmered with patterns of gold and deep purple. And despite the terrible wounds that covered her body, she was still alive. Her compound eyes tracking Marcus as he approached, she hissed at him, her mandibles clicking in what he knew was a threat display, a warning to stay back, but there was no strength behind it. Just the desperate defiance of a creature who knew she was dying but refused to give up. Sergeant Davis called out, "What do you want us to do with her?" Marcus did not answer right away, studying the alien before him, taking in the ornate markings on her shell and the strange crown-like ridge on her head and the way the other dead HFY were positioned around her. As if they had died trying to protect her, she was important. He realized, very important. And his training told him exactly what he should do with an important enemy prisoner. "Leave her," said Lieutenant Hawkins through the radio, his voice crackling with static. "Leave the bug and complete your mission. We need that facility destroyed in 10 minutes. The words were clear and the order was direct. And Marcus knew that following orders was what kept soldiers alive in situations like this. But he could not stop looking at the alien, could not stop seeing the way she watched him with those strange eyes. She was dying. He could see that clearly. The green blood pooling beneath her body, and the way her breathing came in shallow gasps. And without medical attention, she would be dead in minutes. "Just leave her, Sarge," Chun said, her voice tired and impatient. "She's just another bug. Who cares if she dies?" But Marcus did care. And he could not explain why, could not put into words the feeling that rose up in his chest when he looked at this wounded enemy. This alien creature who should have been nothing but an obstacle to be removed. He saw fear in her eyes and pain. And beneath all of that, he saw something that transcended species and language and all the hatred that war creates. He saw a being who wanted to live, who had people she cared about and things she still wanted to do, who was not ready to let go of existence. "Help me move this beam," Marcus said, his voice quiet but firm. "Sarge." Davis protested, but Marcus cut him off with a look that silenced any further argument. "Help me move the beam." That is an order. They moved the beam, Chun and Davis and 2 others, straining against the weight while Marcus pulled the alien free from the wreckage. And she hissed and clicked in what might have been pain or might have been surprise. But she did not try to fight them. Marcus pulled out his field medical kit and began working on her wounds, cauterizing the worst of the bleeding with tools designed for human flesh, but serviceable enough for alien chitin. And the whole time she watched him with those compound eyes, never looking away. "Sergeant Cole," Lieutenant Hawkins screamed through the radio, "What the hell are you doing? I ordered you to leave that alien and complete your mission." Marcus turned off his radio. "The facility is going to explode in 8 minutes. Davis said, "We need to move now if we are going to make it out. Then we move now," Marcus replied, picking up the alien in his arms like she weighed nothing, though in truth she was heavier than any human he had ever carried, her shell solid and dense against his chest. They ran through the tunnels, Marcus carrying the wounded alien while his squad provided cover. And behind them, the explosions began as the charges they had set started to detonate. Collapsing the tunnels one by one in a cascade of fire, and Stone Chun was the first to fall, hit by plasma fire from a HFY patrol that had stumbled upon them in the chaos. And Marcus could not stop to help her, could only keep running while her screams echoed in his ears. Davis was next, staying behind to hold a choke point so the others could escape. And Marcus heard the moment when his rifle stopped firing and knew that another friend was gone. They burst out of the tunnels into the burning night of Tesseract 7. The sky lit up with the fire of orbital bombardment and the wreckage of ships falling through the atmosphere. And Marcus ran across the broken ground with the alien in his arms, his lungs screaming for air and his legs threatening to give out beneath him. And then they were surrounded. Deathery soldiers emerged from the smoke and fire, their weapons raised, their postures aggressive. And Marcus knew that this was the end, that he had sacrificed everything for nothing, that he and the alien would both die here on this burning moon. But the HFY did not fire. They stared at Marcus, at the wounded alien in his arms, and something changed in their posture. Something that Marcus did not understand but could feel in the sudden stillness that fell over the battlefield. One of them stepped forward, a large warrior with scars covering his shell, and he spoke in broken human language, his voice clicking and buzzing in ways that made the words almost impossible to understand. He said, "You save her." Why? Marcus looked down at the alien in his arms, at her golden markings and her crown-like ridge and her compound eyes that were still watching him, still aware despite all the blood she had lost, because she was dying. Marcus said, and I could help. The warrior stared at him for a long moment, and then he made a gesture that brought the other soldiers to attention. And they approached Marcus not with weapons raised, but with something like reverence in their movements. They took her from his arms, gently, so gently as if she were the most precious thing in the universe. And the warrior turned back to Marcus one final time. "You will be remembered," the warrior said, and then they were gone, vanishing into the smoke and fire, leaving Marcus alone on the burning moon with the bodies of his friends and a feeling in his chest that he would carry for the rest of his life. He did not know who she was, did not know why the HFY treated her with such care, did not know what his actions had meant in the larger scope of the war. He only knew that he had done the right thing, even though it had cost him everything. And 30 years later, sitting in a hospital watching the news of a HFY queen coming to Earth, Marcus Cole finally began to understand just how much that single choice had changed the galaxy forever. The whole world was watching when the HFY royal ship descended through the clouds above New Geneva, its organic curves catching the sunlight in ways that made it look like a living creature rather than a vessel of metal and technology. Marcus stood at his window in the Veterans Hospital, his old hands pressed against the glass, watching the ship grow larger as it approached the landing zone that had been hastily prepared in the center of the city. He had not slept since the news first broke 3 days ago, his mind racing with memories and questions and a hope so fragile that he was afraid to examine it too closely. Her name was Zethrael. The news anchor said, "Zethrael the Undying, Queen of the HFY Dominion for 200 years, the ruler who had ended their civil wars and united their people and survived more assassination attempts than anyone could count. And 30 years ago, someone had tried to kill her on a burning moon called Tesseract 7. Marcus had watched every news report and read every article he could find, piecing together the story that he had never known. The story of what had happened after he carried that wounded alien through fire and chaos. She had been a young queen then, barely 50 years on the throne. And the assassination attempt had been orchestrated by rivals within her own court, who wanted to seize power during the chaos of the war with humanity. And she had been left for dead in that command bunker, abandoned by traitors who thought she would never survive, but she had survived. Because a human soldier had refused to let her die. The HFY called it the miracle of Tesseract, a turning point in their history when the young queen had been saved by the most unlikely of saviors. And in the years that followed, Zethrael had used that story to unite her people in ways that would have been impossible otherwise. If a human could show such mercy to an enemy, she had told her people, then perhaps there was something about these strange soft-shelled creatures that was worth understanding. The armistice that ended the war had been her doing, pushed through against the objections of her military commanders and her political rivals. And though the peace had been cold and distant, it had held for 30 years without breaking, and now she was here on Earth. And Marcus was beginning to understand why the news was full of speculation about the purpose of her visit, with experts and politicians offering theories that range from trade negotiations to alliance proposals to warnings about a new threat that both species would need to face together. But Marcus knew the truth, could feel it in his bones with a certainty that he could not explain. She was looking for him. The thought was absurd. He knew that. The idea that the most powerful alien ruler in the galaxy had come all this way for one old forgotten soldier in a charity hospital. But he could not shake the feeling that had taken hold of him since the moment he first saw her ship on the news. Remembered the way she had looked at him in that bunker, the way her compound eyes had tracked his every movement as he worked to save her life. And he remembered the words the warrior had spoken before they disappeared into the smoke. You will be remembered. But he had not been remembered, not by anyone on his own side. His actions buried and forgotten by commanders who saw only the danger of what he had done, not the humanity of it. And Marcus had spent 30 years believing that the promise of that warrior meant nothing. Now he was not so sure. A knock on his door pulled him away from the window, and he turned to find Nurse Patricia standing in the doorway with a strange expression on her face. Part confusion and part excitement and part something else that Marcus could not identify. Mr. Cole, she said, there are some people here to see you. Marcus frowned, because he had no family left to visit him and no friends outside these walls. And he could not imagine who would come looking for him now. Send them in, he said. And Patricia stepped aside to reveal two figures in dark suits with the unmistakable bearing of government agents. They introduced themselves with names that Marcus forgot immediately, explaining that they were from the Terran Diplomatic Corps and that they had been searching for him for the past 3 days. Searching for me, Marcus repeated. Why would anyone be searching for me? The agents exchanged a look, and one of them pulled out a tablet and showed Marcus a photograph that made his heart stop beating. It was a picture of him, young and strong and covered in soot and blood, carrying an alien through the burning ruins of Tesseract 7. And the image was grainy and unclear but unmistakably real, captured by some camera drone that had been recording the battle. Where did you get this? Marcus whispered. The HFY gave it to us, the agent said, along with a request, a demand really, from Queen Zethrael herself. Marcus looked up from the photograph, his eyes meeting the agent's gaze. What does she want? He asked. Though he already knew the answer. She wants to meet you, the agent replied. She says she has been searching for you for 30 years, ever since that night on Tesseract 7. And she will not leave Earth until she has spoken with you. Marcus sat down heavily on his bed, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a physical force. All these years, he said, all these years I thought nobody remembered. Nobody cared about what happened that night. The agent shook his head, his expression softening slightly. The HFY never forgot. He said, they've been trying to find you since the war ended. But your records were classified and your service history was buried. And nobody on our side would help them because nobody wanted to admit that a Terran soldier had saved the HFY. Queen Marcus laughed, a short and bitter sound that held 30 years of pain and loneliness. They threw me away. He said, they threw me away because I did the right thing. And now you are telling me that the aliens I was supposed to hate have been searching for me all this time." The agents did not respond, because there was nothing they could say that would make it better. Nothing that would give Marcus back the years he had lost, or the friends who had died, or the life he might have lived if his own people had shown him even a fraction of the gratitude that the HFY had apparently felt all along. But there was something they could give him now. "Queen Zethro has requested an audience with you tomorrow," the agent said, "at the Terran Diplomatic Hall, and the entire government is working to make this happen, because she has made it very clear that no other business will be conducted until she has met the man who saved her life." Marcus looked at the photograph in his hands, at the young soldier he had once been, and the alien queen he had carried through fire. "Tell her I will be there," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "Tell her I remember her too." The Terran Diplomatic Hall was the largest and most impressive building in New Geneva, a soaring structure of glass and steel that had been built to host the most important meetings between humanity and the alien civilizations they had encountered. Among the stars today, it would host a meeting that nobody had ever imagined possible. Marcus Cole stood in a small room off the main hall, wearing a new uniform that the government had provided for him. The dress blues of the Terran Marine Corps, with all the medals and ribbons he had earned during his service, including several he had never known he was awarded. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man looking back. Cleaned up and polished and presented like something valuable after decades of being treated like garbage. And he felt a bitter amusement at how quickly people changed their attitudes when it became convenient for Thema. Young officer knocked on the door and told him it was time. And Marcus took a deep breath and followed her through corridors, lined with security personnel and diplomats and journalists who all stopped and stared as he walked past the doors to the main hall open before him. And Marcus stepped into a room filled with 1,000 beings from 2 different species. Humans on one side and HFY on the other, all of them watching him with an intensity that made him want to turn around and run back to his hospital room. But he did not run, because Marcus Cole had never run from anything in his life. And he was not about to start. Now the hall was arranged around a central platform where a massive throne had been constructed, not from metal or stone, but from some organic material that seemed to pulse with faint light. And upon that throne sat the queen of the HFY Dominion. She was larger than he remembered, her chitin gleaming with the same patterns of gold and purple that he had seen 30 years ago. And her crown ridge had grown more elaborate with age, spreading across her head like a living crown of bone and shell. But her eyes were the same, those compound eyes that had watched him so intently as he worked to save her life. And when she saw him enter the hall, something changed in her posture, a subtle shift that somehow communicated more emotion than any human gesture. Could Marcus walk toward the throne, feeling the weight of 1,000 stares pressing down on him? And he was aware of everything around him with the sharp clarity that he remembered from combat. The rustle of clothing and the click of HFY limbs and the distant hum of recording equipment capturing every moment. He stopped at the base of the platform and stood at attention, because that was what soldiers did when they met royalty. And he waited for her to speak. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. And then Queen Zethrael rose from her throne and descended the steps toward him, her 8 legs carrying her with a grace that seemed impossible for a creature of her size. She stopped in front of him, so close that he could see the individual facets of her compound eyes. And when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong and perfectly human in its pronunciation. "Do you recall me?" Human Marcus looked up at her, at this alien queen who had ruled an empire for 2 centuries, who had survived wars and assassinations and the hatred of her enemies. And he saw not a monster or an alien or an enemy, but simply a being he had once helped when she needed it most. "Yes, Your Majesty," he said. Though you were lighter back then, the hall went silent. So silent that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. And he realized that he had just made a joke to the most powerful alien in the known galaxy. A joke that could be taken as an insult by anyone who did not understand human humor. But Queen Zithrael laughed. It was a strange sound, clicking and rattling in ways that human throats could never produce. But it was unmistakably laughter. And the tension in the hall shattered like glass as both humans and Kethvari realized that something extraordinary was happening. "I have gained weight," the Queen admitted, her compound eyes glittering with what Marcus could only interpret as amusement. Being queen involves many feasts and very little running through burning tunnels. Marcus felt a smile tugging at his lips despite himself. "I could carry you again if needed," he said. "But I might need a stretcher this time." The Queen laughed again. And then her posture changed, becoming more serious, more formal. And she turned to address the assembled crowd. "I have searched for this human for 30 cycles," she declared, her voice echoing through the hall. "I sent agents to your world and offered rewards and demanded assistance from your governments. But your people hid him from me, buried his story in classified files and forgotten records, treated him as if his actions were shameful rather than honorable." She turned back to Marcus, and he saw something in her eyes that he had not expected to see. "I know what they did to you," she said, her voice softer now, meant for him alone. "I know that they discharged you and denied you recognition and left you to grow old in poverty while the galaxy changed around you. And I want you to know that I never forgot what you did." Not for a single day. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Emotions he had buried for decades, rising up like water breaking through a dam. "I did not save you for recognition," he said. "I saved you because it was the right thing to do. I know," the Queen replied, "and that is what makes your kind so terrifying and so wonderful. You do not calculate. You simply act. You see suffering and you respond to it without asking what you will gain. And that is something my people have never truly understood about humans." She raised one of her arms and made a gesture. An attendant came forward carrying cases of polished metal that they placed at Marcus's feet. "This is not payment," the Queen announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Debt cannot be repaid. This is acknowledgement. Let all beings know that the Kethvari do not forget those who help us. And let them know that this human, this forgotten soldier, changed the course of history with a single act of compassion." The cases were opened to reveal treasures beyond anything Marcus had ever imagined. Precious metals and gems and technology that gleamed with alien light. Enough wealth to buy a planet. Enough to make any human the richest person alive. But Marcus barely looked at I, was looking at the Queen, at Zethrael the Undying. And he was thinking about a night 30 years ago when he had made a choice that defined who he was. "Thank you," he said, "but I do not need wealth. I never wanted anything for what I did." "Then what do you want?" the Queen asked. "Name it, and it is yours." Anything in my power to give. Marcus thought about it, really thought about it. About all the things he could ask for and all the ways his life could change. And then he smiled. "I want to see the stars again," he said, "one more time before I die. I want to go out there and see what the universe looks like from the other side." The Queen studied him for a long moment. And then she made a sound that might have been a sigh. "You humans," she said. "You are given the chance to ask for anything, and you ask for adventure, for experience, for something that cannot be measured or held. Is that a no?" Marcus asked. The Queen reached out and placed one of her massive clawed hands on his shoulder. A gesture that made the security personnel on both sides reach for their weapons before they caught themselves. "That is a yes," she said. "You will have your stars, Marcus Cole. You will have a ship and a crew and the freedom to travel wherever you wish for as long as you live, and you will do so as a friend of the Kethvari Dominion. honored in our courts and welcomed in our worlds. Because you showed mercy to a dying queen when mercy was the last thing anyone expected. Marcus looked up at her. This alien being who had remembered him across 30 years and across the vast distances between stars. And he felt tears forming in his eyes for the first time in longer than he could remember. "Thank you," he said, and the words were not enough, could never be enough. But they were all he had. The queen nodded, and then she did something that shocked everyone in the hall. Something that had never been done before in all the history of the Dominion. She bowed to him, a formal and deep bow of respect, and behind her, every HFY in the hall followed her example. 1,000 aliens bowing to one old human soldier who had done nothing more than the right thing. And in that moment, Marcus Cole finally felt remembered. 1 year had passed since the day Marcus Cole stood before the Queen of the HFY Dominion. And in that year, everything had changed. He stood now on the observation deck of a ship called the Remembered Debt, watching a nebula bloom with colors that human eyes had never been designed to see. Swirls of purple and gold and deep crimson that stretched across the void like the brushstrokes of some cosmic artist. The ship was his, a gift from Queen Zethrael, crewed by HFY warriors who had sworn their service to him for the rest of his life. And it had carried him to corners of the galaxy that no human had ever visited, to worlds of crystal forests and oceans of liquid light and cities that floated in the atmospheres of gas giants. Marcus had never imagined that his life would end this way, sailing among the stars with an alien honor guard. But he had learned long ago that the universe had a strange sense of humor. A sound behind him made him turn, and he saw a young HFY approaching across the deck. Her chiton marked with patterns of silver and blue that identified her as a member of the royal family. Her name was Zethara, and she was one of Queen Zethrael's own daughters, sent to travel with Marcus and learn about humanity from the one human the Dominion trusted above all others. "You are watching the nebula again," she said, her voice carrying the clicking undertones of her species, but otherwise perfectly clear. "It is beautiful," Marcus replied, turning back to the view. "I never get tired of it." Zethara moved to stand beside him, her compound eyes reflecting the swirling colors of the cosmic cloud. "May I ask you something?" she said after a moment of silence. "Of course. Why did you save my mother?" It was a question she had asked him before, many times over the past year, always in different ways and always searching for some deeper answer than the one he gave. And Marcus always told her the same thing: because she was dying, and "I could help, but that is not a reason," Zethara insisted, her voice carrying a frustration that had become familiar to Marcus. "You were at war. She was your enemy. Saving her put your own life at risk and cost the lives of your companions. By any logical calculation, you should have let her die." Marcus smiled, a sad and knowing expression that had become common on his face in these past months. "That is the difference between us," he said. "Humans do not always calculate. We feel. We see someone suffering and something inside us responds. Something that does not care about logic or strategy or personal gain." He turned to face her, looking up at her towering form with the same steady gaze he had once given to enemy soldiers. "Your mother was dying," he said. "She was in pain, and she was afraid, and she was alone. And when I looked at her, I did not see an enemy. I saw a living being who did not want to die, and I could not walk away from that. No matter what it cost." Zethara was silent for a long moment, processing his words the way she always did, trying to fit them into a framework of understanding that her species had developed over thousands of years. "This is why we feared you," she said finally. "This is why we still fear you, because we save our enemies, because you are unpredictable." She replied, "Because we cannot model your behavior or anticipate your choices. You follow rules that we do not understand, rules that seem to contradict themselves, rules that produce outcomes we never expect." She paused, her compound eyes fixed on the nebula. "Your compassion is as terrifying as your violence." She continued, "When you fight with a fury that defies reason, throwing yourselves against impossible odds and refusing to surrender even when defeat is certain. But when you choose mercy, you show a kindness that is equally absolute, equally unreasonable." Marcus nodded, understanding what she was trying to say, even if she could not quite find the words. "We are a lot to handle." He admitted. Zethra made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Yes," she agreed, "you are. But perhaps that is not a bad thing." "What do you mean?" "My mother used to tell me that the galaxy was governed by calculation." She explained that every species acted according to its own interests, and that peace was only possible when those interests aligned. But you showed her something different. You showed her that some beings act according to principles that transcend interest. And that changed the way she understood everything. The nebula pulsed with light, vast clouds of gas and dust collapsing into new stars that would burn for billions of years. She told me once that saving her life was the smallest part of what you did. Zethra continued. The greater gift was showing her that the universe contained beings capable of true selflessness. Beings who would sacrifice everything for strangers without expecting anything in return. Marcus felt a warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling he had come to recognize as something like peace. "I did not know any of that at the time," he said. "I was just trying to do the right thing, and that," Zethar replied, "is exactly the point." They stood together in silence, human and alien, watching the nebula paint the void with impossible colors. And Marcus thought about all the strange turns his life had taken, all the pain and loss and loneliness that had led him to this moment. He thought about the friends who had died on Tesseract 7, about Chun and Davis and all the others who had given their lives so that he could carry a wounded alien to safety. And he wished they could see him now, sailing among the stars with an honor guard of former enemies. He thought about the years in the hospital, the decades of being forgotten and dismissed, the slow erosion of hope that had almost broken him before the Queen's ship appeared in Earth's sky. And he thought about the future, about the story that was spreading across the galaxy, the story of a human soldier who had defied orders and risked everything to save an alien queen. That story was changing things. He knew, changing the way other species thought about humanity, showing them that humans were more than the violent and warlike creatures they had seemed to be during the dark years of the HFY War. One act of compassion, rippling outward across time and space, touching lives that Marcus would never meet and shaping a future he would never see. Is it worth it? Zethara asked suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. All the pain and loss and sacrifice, is it worth it for the chance to do something good? Marcus thought about the question. Really thought about it. And then he nodded. Yes, he said. It is always worth it. The nebula burned before them, beautiful and eternal. And Marcus Cole stood among the stars and knew that his life had meant something after all when he died 3 years later. Queen Zethrael declared a day of mourning across the entire HFY dominion. The first time such an honor had ever been given to a being who was not HFY's body, was returned to Earth and buried with full military honors, finally recognized by his own people for what he had done. And representatives from a dozen alien species attended the funeral to pay their respects, but his true memorial stood on the HFY homeworld, a statue of white stone in the center of their capital city, depicting a young human soldier carrying a wounded alien queen through fire and chaos. The plaque at its base was written in both HFY and Terran languages, and it said simply this: Marcus Cole, human, he carried the queen through fire. He asked for nothing. He is remembered, and across the galaxy, in schools and academies and training centers, the story of Marcus Cole was taught to young beings of every species as an example of what true courage and true compassion looked like, not the courage to fight, though he had that too, but the courage to show mercy when mercy was hardest, to see an enemy as a person, to do the right thing even when the right thing cost everything. That was the legacy of Marcus Cole, and it would echo through history long after the stars themselves had burned out and faded away, because that is what humans do. They carry others through fire, and they ask for nothing in return.